The sky over Paris was a soft canvas of lavender and gold, the Seine flowing gently beneath bridges that had stood for centuries. Gas lamps flickered to life along cobblestone streets. It was 1887, and something strange was happening in the heart of France. A skeleton of iron was rising, taller than the city had ever seen, sharper than anything its skyline had known. At first, people whispered. Then they mocked. In salons filled with wine and smoke, the elite scoffed at the madness of building such an ugly beast. A tower? They laughed. Made of iron? As tall as the sky? Monstrous! But one man didn't laugh. Gustave Eiffel, born in Dijon to a modest family. Eiffel was a man of vision, a structural engineer who saw not just buildings, but possibilities. He believed in metal not as cold or dead, but as something alive. His bridges across the Garonne and his railway stations had already made him famous. Yet nothing would compare to what he dreamed for Paris now. He had stood by the river months before the foundation was laid, staring at the city he loved. Paris must rise, he had murmured to himself. It must dare. When the French government announced a design competition for a monument to mark the 1889 World's Fair, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, over 100 artists submitted proposals. Some imagined gigantic fountains, others sprawling sculptures of mythical gods. Eiffel proposed a tower 300 meters high, made entirely of iron lattice. The committee hesitated. Was it too audacious? Too ugly? But Eiffel had one thing others didn't. He had proof. His designs were precise, his calculations unbreakable. And so, the contract was signed. Construction began in January 1887. The first months were chaos. Weather fought them. Supplies came late. Workers quit. Protests broke out in nearby neighborhoods. People called it Eiffel's scandal. But Eiffel, calm as ever, walked the site daily. He shook hands with riveters, stood shoulder to shoulder with engineers, and reminded them, this tower is not just steel, it is France. Little by little, the base took shape. 4 massive legs rooted into the Champ de Mars, each angled precisely to distribute weight evenly. No cranes could reach the height they planned. Everything was lifted by steam-powered hoists, and every bolt was tightened by hand, over 2.5 million of them. Each evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, Eiffel would climb to the highest point they had built that day and stare out across the city. As buildings shrank below him, he imagined the view when the tower was complete. He imagined lovers strolling beneath its legs, children pointing skyward, tourists from every country leaning over the edge to watch the world shrink beneath their feet. But not everyone was enchanted. A petition signed by dozens of Paris's most respected artists and architects declared the tower an abomination. A hateful column of bolted metal, they called it, a disgrace to our city. Eiffel was unshaken. My tower will speak for itself, he replied. By the end of 1888, it had already begun to do so. From the riverbanks, the tower was no longer a rumor. It pierced the sky like a sword. Half built, it was already taller than anything around it. The newspapers changed their tone. Where once they mocked, now they marveled. They printed illustrations with bold titles. La Tour de Fer, the Iron Giant of Paris. Children cheered as iron beams swung through the air like bones of a giant rising. Artists, despite their complaints, could not resist sketching it. Poets wrote verses by candlelight comparing it to a goddess wrapped in silver armor. And still the work continued. Rain, snow. But the men did not stop. There were no safety harnesses, no nets. Just balance, precision, and guts. Some days, Eiffel stood with his men, even at 200 meters in the air, to show he trusted the tower more than anyone else. She will not fall, he would say. Not today. Not ever. Then came March 31st, 1889. A gust of wind swept over the tower's peak as Eiffel stepped into the elevator for the final ascent. The top platform was ready. He brought with him a group of journalists, engineers, and one flag, blue, white, and red. The elevator rattled as it climbed, the world growing smaller beneath them. When he stepped out at the summit, the crowd below erupted in cheers. Fireworks exploded in the distance. Paris was on fire with celebration. Eiffel unfurled the French flag and let it wave in the wind. I have given you a monument to the future, he said. And so it was. The Eiffel Tower, all 10,100 tons of it, stood 984 feet tall, unlike anything the world had ever seen. It became the tallest man-made structure on Earth, and would remain so until the Chrysler Building in New York overtook it in 1930. But Eiffel wasn't finished. He had one more surprise. At the top of the tower, he installed a meteorological lab, a radio transmission room, and scientific instruments. "This is not just beauty," he told skeptics. "It is science." The 1889 World's Fair opened with more than 2 million visitors. Foreign kings, queens, engineers, and explorers came to see the tower. People waited hours just to ride the elevator to the top. For many, it was their first time ever seeing the world from above the clouds. A young girl from London clutched her father's coat and whispered, "Papa, are we flying?" An old man from Egypt stared across the horizon and said, "So this is what the gods must see." And Eiffel? He simply stood at the base, looking up, his hands behind his back. His dream had come to life, but stories never end where they begin. The tower had more journeys ahead. More love, more war, more mystery. It would survive world wars, see secret experiments, inspire generations, and even become a beacon for spies and rebels. It was no longer just a tower, it was Paris, and the world was watching. The Eiffel Tower had become the heartbeat of Paris. In its iron bones, the spirit of the city pulsed, elegant, defiant, and unyielding. For a structure once mocked as a metal monster, it now held the breath of millions. In the summer of 1890, a young couple stood at its base. Elise, a painter's daughter from Montmartre, clutched a letter in her hand, her fingers trembling. Her fiancé, Jules, was leaving for the colonies, a soldier called to distant Africa. They had met beneath the half-built tower just 2 years earlier. Now, fully risen, the tower stood as witness to their last moment together. "I will write to you from wherever I go," Jules whispered. Elise looked up at the tower. "Then I will wait right here, each Sunday, beneath her legs." The Eiffel Tower, they believed, could hold promises. And so she did. Each week, Elise returned to the base with her sketch pad, drawing the tower from every angle, through every season. Paris changed around her, cabs replacing carriages, fashion growing bolder. But the tower stood as a silent sentinel. Even when storms rattled the city, even when the Seine flooded, she did not miss a Sunday. It wasn't just lovers who were drawn to her. Scientists climbed to her summit to study wind currents. Astronomers took measurements, peering into the stars from its viewing platform. Even early filmmakers captured scenes of its construction and the flow of tourists who gazed at it in awe. By 1900, Paris was exploding with color, invention, and music. The Belle Époque was in full bloom. Art Nouveau curled into architecture. Music spilled from café doors. The Eiffel Tower was no longer just a structure. It was a symbol of modernity, of light, of France. But in 1909, her fate trembled. The original permit stated that the tower would stand for only 20 years. The city council debated its removal. "It has served its time," said one politician. "Now it scars the skyline." Yet once again, Gustave Eiffel came forward. Not with charm, but with science. "This tower," he argued, "is not obsolete. It can do more than any cathedral. It can talk." And talk it did. Eiffel allowed military radiotelegraphy experiments atop the tower. In 1903, the first wireless transmission was sent from the summit to a station in the Pantheon. By 1906, it had sent signals as far as North Africa. The army saw its potential. It could spy. It could communicate. It could command. The tower was saved. And not just saved, it became essential. Then came war. 1914, the Great War. Paris trembled under threat. Germany advanced across Europe with brutal speed. Cities fell. Smoke choked villages. The world held its breath. And at the center of it all, the Eiffel Tower stood tall, unshaken, unbent. Its radio room became a command center. From its height, messages were intercepted, coordinates transmitted, enemy movements tracked. One day, a signal intercepted by the tower helped capture German spy Agent 21, a single moment that changed the tide of battle in the north. The Eiffel Tower had become a weapon. On the streets, Parisians no longer whispered about art or poetry. They spoke of battles, losses, survival. Yet the tower glowed at night, a reminder that Paris still stood, that she refused to fall. During a particularly violent night in 1916, as airships hovered on the horizon and alarms wailed across the city, an old man climbed the tower alone. He was a soldier, retired, a survivor of the Franco-Prussian War. He carried a folded French flag in his coat. At the top, he stood beneath the stars and whispered a single sentence: "You will outlive us all." And she did. When the war ended, the tower remained untouched, scarred only by the memories of what it had witnessed. Then, as peace settled across Europe once more, the Eiffel Tower returned to joy. The 1920s arrived with a bang. The Jazz Age. Flappers. Automobiles. Champagne flowing like rivers through the veins of Montparnasse. From atop the tower, the city sparkled. It was during this time that a new art form took interest in the tower. Cinema. Filmmakers used her as a backdrop, her iron curves becoming part of the Parisian myth. In 1925, an American pilot named Charles took a dare and flew his biplane under the arches of the tower. The crowd below gasped, believing they had witnessed suicide, but he passed through untouched, proof, he claimed, that flying through the soul of Paris would never bring harm. The Eiffel Tower had become legend, but legends are always tested. In 1939, as storm clouds returned to Europe, a cold wind blew across France. The Second World War began. This time, the danger would not pass by Paris. Nazi flags soon waved at the borders. Paris fell in 1940. German forces entered the city in formation, tanks rattling over the bridges, soldiers marching in boots that had crushed a continent. They came for the Louvre, for Notre Dame, and they came for the tower. One SS officer demanded that a swastika be flown from the very top. But the flag was too large. The wind ripped it away within hours. Another was hoisted, smaller, meaner, but it never flew the same way. To ensure the occupiers could not enjoy the tower's height, French resistance fighters secretly cut the lift cables. If the Nazis wanted to climb, they'd have to do it on foot. It worked. Even Hitler never made the climb. When he visited Paris in June 1940, the dictator stood at the base of the Eiffel Tower and stared upward. "Cut her down," he muttered. But he never did. The tower endured. Through 4 long years of occupation, she stood silently, like a prisoner refusing to bow. In 1944, as the Allies approached, Hitler gave the order, "Destroy all Parisian monuments." But General Dietrich von Koltitz disobeyed. He could not bring himself to destroy the Eiffel Tower. "I cannot," he later said, "be the man who killed Paris." And so, when the city was liberated, the tower stood tall, wrapped once again in the tricolor of France. Parisians danced at her feet. Couples kissed in her shadow. The bells of Notre Dame rang as if the war had never happened. The Eiffel Tower had become something more than a landmark. She was survival. She was hope. In the decades that followed, her fame only grew. By the 1960s, the tower had become a global icon. Her image was everywhere. Postcards, posters, fashion, cinema. Hollywood turned to her. Audrey Hepburn danced near her. James Bond fought atop her. Artists painted her again, and even cartoon mice traveled to Paris just to admire her. Yet she never aged. She was repainted every 7 years. 20,000 light bulbs were installed to make her shimmer like a galaxy by night. In 1985, an elevator was added to reach the summit even faster. Visitors now numbered in the millions, and they came from every corner of the world. On a warm evening in the summer of 1989, exactly 100 years after her birth, the Eiffel Tower was celebrated like royalty. Fireworks bathed her in color. Dancers performed at her base. The French president raised a glass and toasted, "To the Iron Lady, forever young, forever bold." But not all visitors came with joy. In 2015, Paris was struck by tragedy. A series of coordinated attacks plunged the city into mourning. Sirens screamed, streets emptied. The tower was dimmed for days, her lights off, silent in grief. Yet when she lit up again, she did so in blue, white, and red. Strong, unbroken. Tourists gathered once again beneath her arches. Parisians walked her steps as if defying fear itself. Messages of love, peace, and unity flooded her platforms. "She is not just steel," one boy whispered to his father. "She's our heart." The Eiffel Tower had seen war, celebration, betrayal, and love. She had welcomed kings, dreamers, rebels, and poets. She had stood through revolutions, storms, and peace treaties, and still she stood. In 2024, a new record was broken. Her 300 millionth visitor arrived, a girl from rural India, wide-eyed and trembling. When asked what she thought of the tower, she simply said, "I feel like I'm standing inside a dream." Perhaps that was always the secret. The Eiffel Tower, for all her iron bones and rivets, was never really a machine. She was a dream made real, a sculpture of ambition. She had no palace, no stained glass windows, no throne. But she ruled Paris in silence. She didn't speak. She listened. To every whispered proposal, every violin song played beneath her legs, every child who looked up in wonder. She held their stories. And in return they loved her. Not just Parisians, the world. To touch the Eiffel Tower was to touch human history. A reminder that something impossible could still rise from the earth. That dreams, no matter how heavy, could climb into the sky. Beneath the Eiffel Tower, time slows down. Children chase pigeons across the plaza. Lovers trace names on metal columns. A street violinist plays La Vie en Rose. And somewhere, someone is proposing. It's a daily ritual, an unspoken understanding that the Iron Lady will always be the backdrop to the city's most beautiful moments. Yet for all her glory, the Eiffel Tower had not always been so universally adored. In the early 21st century, the city of Paris debated what it meant to be modern. Skyscrapers had climbed over Dubai and Shanghai. Innovations raced through Silicon Valleys. And Paris? She had her tower. Timeless. Untouched. Some developers proposed building a taller tower nearby. To reclaim the crown, they said. But Parisians didn't want a new queen. They had one. The Eiffel Tower was not the tallest structure anymore. She wasn't the most high-tech, but she didn't need to be. She was something more powerful. Iconic. In 2021, engineers began reinforcing her frame. Not because she was weak, but because she had become sacred. Preservation teams, artists, welders, and historians worked together. Every inch of paint was examined, every rivet checked, every floor polished with care. Over 60 tons of paint were added, brushed in her signature hue, Eiffel Tower brown. And as they worked, stories whispered around her legs once again. Tour guides recounted the legend of a man who once tried to marry the tower. He claimed her iron curves held his soul. They laughed about the time a thief tried to sell the tower for scrap metal, twice, and nearly succeeded. Students sketched her silhouette. Poets scribbled verses in notebooks. Instagram was flooded with photos, selfies, sunsets, and sparkling night views. She had adapted. 135 years after her birth, she wasn't just a monument anymore. She was a character in the story of every visitor, a guardian of the past, a bridge between centuries. Then something strange happened. In 2017, a solar storm disrupted satellites across Europe. Communication lines failed. GPS signals crashed. Flights were grounded. But from the top of the Eiffel Tower, an old emergency transmitter still worked. The signal pulsed, steady, reliable. France reconnected with the world through a machine built in the 19th century. It wasn't the first time she saved the country. And perhaps it wouldn't be the last. One morning in spring, a group of school children stood at her base, holding notebooks and wide eyes. Their teacher, a woman with silver hair and a voice full of fire, asked, "Do you know why this tower was built?" Hands shot up. "To celebrate France. To show we could build the tallest tower. To scare away the Germans!" The teacher smiled. All true in some way. But that's not why she still stands. Silence. Then she said, "The Eiffel Tower stands because it reminds us that ideas, no matter how strange, bold, or different, can change the world." A boy raised his hand. "Is she still changing the world?" She pointed to the top. "Go climb. You'll find out." And they did. 300 steps. Then a lift. Then the sky. From the summit, Paris looked like a painting. White rooftops, winding alleys, rivers of gold. But above all, there was perspective. From up there, borders felt imaginary. Noise melted into silence. The future didn't feel so far away. As dusk fell, the lights of the tower flickered on. Every hour on the hour, she glittered. Not just glowed, glittered. Thousands of bulbs dancing like stars caught in a net of iron. People stopped, even those who saw her every day, even those running late, tired, cold. For 5 minutes, the city looked up and remembered to dream. It was in those moments that her true power revealed itself. Not in her height, not in her age, but in her ability to pause time, to make people fall in love. With Paris. With life. With each other. One rainy evening, a woman named Anya stood at the second platform, her hands shaking. She was alone, soaking wet, her suitcase by her side. She had flown across the world to escape a life that no longer fit, a broken engagement, a job lost, a city that didn't see her. She climbed without purpose, just motion, just momentum. But at the top she cried, not from sadness, but from awe. Below her the city shimmered. Cars blinked, trees whispered. The river curled like ribbon through stone, and the tower held her. She pulled out a notebook and wrote a line that would later become the title of her best-selling novel. "I climbed a tower to disappear and found myself instead." Stories like these never made the headlines, but they happened, every day, in secret. The Eiffel Tower wasn't just architecture, she was a therapist, a confessional, a lighthouse. Sometimes she was a fortress, standing firm against fear. Sometimes she was a stage, offering light to those who stepped into her glow. She had even become a sanctuary. In 2030, a political protest turned violent near Trocadero. Tear gas filled the air, panic rippled through the crowds. Yet beneath the tower, something unexpected occurred. Strangers held hands. A violinist played. Medics treated wounded. Parisians formed a human circle to shield children. And above them the tower shined. Bright, bold, a silent protector. It's no wonder, then, that many believed the Eiffel Tower was alive. Perhaps not in breath, but in purpose. She evolved with the world. She listened. She remembered. 140 years passed. Then came the moment no one expected. A solar eclipse, total, over Paris. The city prepared for it with celebration. Scientists, astronomers, tourists, children, all gathered at her feet. The Eiffel Tower would be the central viewing point for the first total eclipse visible from Paris in over 200 years. As the sky darkened, a hush fell. Birdsong stopped, wind paused, and for 2 long minutes the world turned silver. From the top of the tower, the view was celestial. A black sun, a glowing ring, day becoming night, time folding in on itself. Then the light returned. Slow, glorious, soft. The crowd erupted in cheers. And in that moment, a girl of 8 years old whispered to her grandfather. She held the sun in her arms. And maybe for just a second she did. By 2045, the Eiffel Tower had become more than a symbol. She was the most visited monument in the world. Her iron beams were 175,000 stories deep. She had inspired 700 films, 18 musicals, thousands of novels, and countless proposals. But she never spoke, not a single word. And yet, everyone felt like she had spoken to them. In 2050, the city announced a new initiative to create a digital memory system that would collect messages, photos, and stories from visitors, embedded in a living archive stored within the tower's foundation. It was called the Voice of the Tower. People from across the world sent messages. To the place where I learned to believe, to the moment that made me forgive, to the tower that saw me become a mother. From space, astronauts orbiting Earth claimed they could spot her glint on a clear night. One even said, "She's the first thing I look for when I miss Earth." And why not? She wasn't just steel. She was humanity. She was defiance. A tower built in the age of gas lamps now stood amidst a world of quantum computing and AI. Still relevant. Still revered. And yet, unchanged. On her 200th birthday, she will still be here. The world will look different. Cities might float. Cars might fly. But someone, somewhere, will walk across the Champ de Mars, look up, and feel the same breath catch in their chest as visitors did 2 centuries ago. Because the Eiffel Tower is not about the past. She's about the possible, and the impossible that dares to rise. She is Paris, and she is forever.